Amber Ellis, thanks so much for joining today to talk about the Upper and Middle James Riparian Consortium. I'm really glad to have you on the We Rise podcast again and to share more with folks, particularly in this course that we're helping to create about building consensus and community and collaboratives. Will you introduce yourself so folks know who I have the delight of speaking to?
Yep, I'm Amber. I'm the Restoration Director with the James River Association, and I also serve as the convener for the Upper and Middle James Riparian Consortium.
Yeah, awesome. So this episode of the podcast is kind of serving a couple different areas of focus. For one, we're just going to use it as a time for storytelling for the consortium, and we're going to take people on a journey about how this particular project got started. We're going to use it as a way to share the story of the consortium out with other partners as well. So we're going to weave together a few different strands, but the background, the story, the why, how it got started, what's your role as a convener, how does our firm Dialogue and Design help support it? There are many, many amazing partners involved and have been engaged for a long time and will be engaged. Who are some of those folks? How has it grown over time? And then how do you keep folks engaged? And then lastly, what does it look like to sustain a collaborative for the long term? So that's a little bit of where we're going. And again, thanks for joining. So tell us a little bit about the background of the consortium. How did it form? What does it do? Where is it based geographically?
How did it form? Well, and it's based, so our work is focused on riparian forest buffers. For those who might not know what that is, It's basically the trees along our waterways. And the region that we cover is a portion, basically the freshwater portions of the James River watershed, Piedmont and mountain areas of the James River watershed. And how it started, probably it formally started in 2019, but it started really before that. I would think we just didn't have a name yet, or we didn't know where we were headed. So it started, we were partnering with some of the local soil and water conservation districts on a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant to target certain areas for cattle exclusion fencing, basically getting cows out of the river. And we had a little bit in there for buffers. I think it was maybe like 3,000 trees we were going to plant over those 3 years.
Why trees? What's important about trees and water?
They are, not to go into my spiel, but my spiel about buffers, they are the most cost-effective strategy we can be using to improve water quality. But that's just the water quality part. So they help with filtering runoff maybe from upland, and they also help, they support in-stream ecosystems that really even more clean the water and support clean water. They provide wildlife habitat. They provide places for people. They stabilize our stream banks. They do it all. And then on top of that, air quality, all of the things, the benefits just keep going for trees.
The benefits are amazing. And
keep going.
Maybe if you'll go ahead and tell people how they can find the consortium website, because there's a great graphic that's been developed with some of the benefits and great resources. So maybe could you go ahead and let people know about that, and then we'll come back to the why of the consortium.
They can find it at jamesriverconsortium.org.
Awesome.
You'll find all of those things there.
And really great resources about partners, programs, a lot of the folks who have been involved. A great graphic, again, developed by Greenfin Studio about some of the benefits of buffers, really highlighting a lot of the things that Amber just talked about, including not just clean water, but the benefits that people experience by being in the streamside forest and buffers and water quality, habitat, so many of those things.
It started way back then. That's when it started, just us and a few other people, and then expanded starting in 2019. But that's probably when it started.
And why? Why take a collaborative approach? Why engage partners, and what has happened since 2019?
So we were fortunate that year. We launched both our James River Buffer program, which is focused on getting more buffers actually in the ground and planted. And we launched the consortium at the same time. So they've been like siblings kind of this whole time.
Right?
Like one doesn't exist without the other one. They were born together and they've evolved together. I don't know how else to say it. But they are about different things. One's about the trees on the ground. One is about connecting those partners and finding all of those. Basically, it's there to tackle listen and capture all of those issues or barriers that are being seen across the landscape and across the watershed. And so it does a good job at that. And so why a collaborative approach? Because you can collaborate. I can collaborate with just somebody on my street to do something. Like I can partner with them on something. But this called for like something larger, that's a little more formal and structured. Because from a water quality perspective, riparian forest buffers there's huge goals in terms of how many acres we need to restore in order to restore the James and ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. And we've been behind on meeting that goal. So there's emphasis on how can we get there? How can we get what needs to be done? And no individual entity can do that on their own. So that was important. And the geography is pretty large. It's pretty large. So it's hard to, again, just partner with just one person. It takes kind of this larger approach.
And what does that look like, that larger approach? Knowing that it's not one entity or person, how does that actually shake out on the...
So when we first formed, if you want to go there yet, but
go for it.
We did stakeholder interviews, dialogue and design, did that, again, having the facilitator do that, not us, because we were part of the ones getting interviewed, to better understand across the watershed and across different types of partners, what are the opportunities, what are the challenges, what are the things they're facing around riparian forest buffers. That was step one, really, to really identify those repeating themes, something that's not just one person dealing with it, or even just two, something that's coming up over and over again. And we used that to inform everything from the structure to what our goals were, to the action teams. All of those things were informed by that.
So that initial phase, to back up and expand on it a little bit more, is an approach that we use quite a bit. And Amber, you talked about your role with listening, but we do use that very intentional approach of listening and then listening more and then listening even and beyond that for what people are saying, what they aren't saying. And those one-on-one interviews that we do with folks are really essential because people don't like to talk in large groups often. It's harder for introverts to talk in large groups until they become comfortable with the group. And so folks are willing to kind of open up and share things. We don't attach anyone's names to the results of the interviews and what we finally produce, the key issues report or stakeholder assessment, so people can speak openly, candidly, and confidentially. And that helps us kind of tease out the nuance of some of the challenges that people are facing. Or where someone would say, hey, if someone would just talk to this person or talk to this partner or resource, we could really unlock some doors, but they might not want to say that publicly. Or someone can say, hey, I see some real barriers around this one, maybe we could do a little bit of skilling up or learning things in another area, and people can talk about that. And so you kind of get this really rich body of knowledge that helps us, we often say go slow to go fast. So this phase of listening at the beginning is important to kind of set the foundation. And then to continue to use the process of listening throughout the consortium and other collaboratives. We'll talk later about evaluation, but checking in. How are we doing? Are we on track towards those goals? Where are some other opportunities? And I think something that likely would be helpful for us to do with the consortium is to do check-ins with the people in a decision-making role. So those folks on the steering committee particularly, and we'll get there, but who haven't been engaged in a while or who have been engaged and say, hey, we're glad you're here. What are your ideas? How are things going? What's happening for you? So that continual process of listening and checking in is important and something we build in to the process. So tell us a little bit more about the vision for the Upper and Middle James Riparian Consortium. What's the change that the consortium is trying to create in the world?
So our vision, which I remember sitting there creating it in the middle of one of our first meetings that year, growing partnerships to create healthy streamside ecosystems for clean water in the James River today and tomorrow. So it's about partnerships. And it's about those healthy streamside ecosystems. And it highlights that focus on the James River, even though our work often expands beyond that, but that's where we're focused.
Yeah, absolutely. That's present tense. It's active voice. It's what we're doing. We're growing partnerships. It's something that is happening and will happen on an ongoing basis. And how are some of those partners engaged early on, Amber? How did folks get engaged? And then as the geography expanded or you've looked to places that haven't been involved, how do partners find out about the consortium or get involved? What does that partnership look like?
I'm trying to think. The first ones in the beginning were ones we were already working. Like we had built trust with certain folks and certain organizations. And so I think that first year or in the beginning, it's building off the trusted relationships you already had, which goes a long way. If you have, especially in some organizations that might, I'm thinking of like our soil and water conservation districts. It's a statewide thing, but there's different districts that cover different counties. If you have key individuals that are already in the collaborative, you've built that trust, other partners in that organization are going to be like, oh, what's going on over there? Tell me more. So building off our trusted relationships was a huge one. And then just for me, it was, fortunately, I've been at JRA for a long time and have interacted with different people in different ways. And so as ideas would emerge as a barrier or something that we're trying to think of a solution on, it was myself or other partners being like, wait, who does this already? Like what partners are already out there doing this that might be interested or may know somebody? So it was kind of just asking and reaching out.
Absolutely. So it's who knows whom, who don't we know, who might know somebody that might know somebody. And so it's just that conversation and reaching out and talking with folks and sometimes very kitchen table, kind of sitting around and just saying like, who can we reach out to that might know somebody? But it's a lot of that person to person, hand to hand, if you will, for that analogy, reaching out.
Yep.
And how many people are engaged with the consortium today and in what ways?
I should know this exact number. It's around 600-ish, I think now. When we started, it was maybe like a dozen of us. And I think just talking about roles of facilitator, I remember myself at the beginning, I was just like, this is enough people. We have a collaborative. We have,
right.
We have our 20 people.
We're good.
And Christine being like, but you gotta open up. So yeah, it's probably close to 600, but they interact in all different kinds of ways. So I think, I don't know if we're going there yet or not, but the consortium having some kind of consistency so that people know how to land there.
Yes.
So we try really hard we have a calendar on our website that we try to keep up to date. We have been consistently doing at least 2 consortium gatherings a year and 1 buffer summit a year. And we try to schedule those early in the year so that people can get them on their calendar and they know that that's coming up. So the consistency is key, and the newsletter every month.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are multiple ways for people to engage. So that looks like, to reiterate and expand on that, there's a planning team that's, at the moment, there's a federal funding freeze on the project. So it's the James River Association, but it's also dialogue and design. Over the years, it's been both entities doing a lot of the behind the scenes logistics planning, looking at what the year will look like, getting input for people and filtering that through, talking about themes and how are people being engaged, or where are we missing the mark? How do we need to adapt? And so it's really important to have a place to be able to talk about that behind the scenes stuff. That's not something that your decision makers are going to want to participate in because it's too detailed, but you need that group that can really work through things and problem solve and speak candidly and be a sounding board for one another, to look at a challenge, to look at a new opportunity, a new funding source, the Buffer Summit is going from a bioregion, to statewide this year. That's huge. And that's something that will take a lot of planning. So that planning team, the steering committee, is where we have a broader number of groups who are engaging, representing different entities and folks throughout the watershed. And those are the folks who are making decisions by consensus. And we have a couple meetings in person every year. Amber, you mentioned those in-person meetings. We'll have in-person steering committee meetings before we have broader consortium meetings, and then field visits. And then we have about 4 calls every year too, online, so that people across the watershed can join. And that steering committee is a really important group. It's they're really helping to shape the future direction of the consortium as a whole with guidance and input from others, but they're really helping to steer the ship, if you will. And then we have ways, you mentioned that the community gatherings, if you will, the consortium gatherings, where it's open to anybody. If that's all that folks want to do, coming to those gatherings twice a year, they can. And then we have field visits built into the day, or a hands-on activity for stewardship or maintenance. And that's where someone can get their hands dirty or learn or see a farm or see a restoration site. And then this buffer summit has been a really great event. We've had 6 of them so far every fall, where we get people from within the watershed, out of the watershed. Everyone's welcome, and we do deeper learning. So we include different levels of learning. We include that kind of 101 knowledge. So what are riparian buffers? How do you do maintenance in a good way? We get out in the field and we see sites, and people get their hands dirty. And so there are multiple ways for people to engage. And then, of course, there are the action teams. And can you talk a little bit about what the action teams are, as well as the role the James River Association plays with the consortium?
Yep. So the action team level is where all of the ideas have to move forward. They got to have people that are doing them, figuring it out. And so we have 3 of those. The implementation team is about on the ground projects. So 2 of the major programs under that team, just as an example, is our James River Buffer program, focused on restoring buffers on properties. And then this James River Stewardship program, which is focused on helping with maintenance and stewardship of buffers installed through a variety of our partners. And JRA's role in that team, we oversee those implementation programs here in the James, as well as some of our partners. So that's that team. Then we have our knowledge network team, which is really focused around kind of like professional development. So like workforce training, making sure, and research, just making sure that people doing the work, well, one, that we have enough people doing the work, and then ones that we do have access to training, have access to research and resources to do the best that they can. And then the targeting and outreach team is focused on awareness building of buffers and the resources that are out there to help the public with either restoring buffers on their property, things like that. So that team's really helpful at like having a shared I guess like language about buffers in the region. So we come together to create these resources with shared information. It's kind of vetted. Yes, that's right. Yes, that's what that is. Yes, that's so that we're all using the same things, and landowners and the public aren't getting different messages.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more about what you do? Yeah, and JRA's role, and Rachel.
Yeah.
And I guess let's normalize that there is a federal funding freeze right now. We're recording this in early 2025. We don't know what it's going to be like in a couple months, but I think it's important to talk about that reality of that and how we're adapting. And then also, I think for the purposes of this conversation, let's also look at if we didn't have a federal funding freeze, what things would look like. And then we can talk about with the federal funding freeze, how we're pivoting, because it's important and it's real.
Yeah. And fortunately for us, we were somewhat prepared. You never can be fully, but yeah. So James River Association and Dialogue and Design share some roles, and we've kind of split things up to where it makes sense for us. So I say it as like JRA, our role is kind of the weavers and the grounders. Like our organization is focused on the James. We're the only one focused on the James. That's our entire mission, is connecting the James and connecting it to people and protecting it. So that's where we land. And then having Dialogue and Design as the facilitators kind of keep the bigger picture there, like the visionary.
Yeah.
Helping with logistics and bringing those skill sets that most organizations do not have in-house. So what that looks like from a day-to-day perspective in terms of like, what am I working on? What are y'all working on? There is myself, who serves as the convener. And then just last year, we brought on a coordinator position to help me. We serve as the primary fiscal agent, getting the funding for this work. We spend a lot of time in the action teams, whereas Dialogue and Design spend more time at the other scale up, I guess. So Rachel and I are helping connect initiative across teams. So if there's one team's looking for a training location, our implementation team probably has a buffer site somewhere. So helping connect the ideas across the teams and coordinating those. People forget that role. Like we keep up with what ideas have come up and trying to like, okay, what are the next steps, and planning those meetings to get that information from our partners to help inform what are we going to do with all of this information. We do the logistical support for meetings. Oftentimes JRA's doing the food, venue stuff. We kind of share outreach to speakers for events, but that's one. Something that we shifted to JRA somewhere in the middle of all of this was some of those core needs that really should live with that convening organization. Think about like the membership list, the metric upkeep, like all of the things we do each year, our monthly newsletter, things like that. And dialogue and design's role in that, I mean, Christine's here, but speaking for them in this moment, is they're kind of facilitating our planning team meetings, the steering committee meetings, those larger gatherings and summits, so that we can actually participate in those. And we have a lot to do within the action teams too. So having that person or that entity that's kind of keeping the big picture in mind and keeping that moving forward is really helpful. They also bring guidance for kind of the processes we might use for evaluation, for how we might engage new partners, help synthesize those meeting summaries and stuff to share back with us from that unbiased opinion on what they're hearing. Because sometimes it's easy, even though I try to keep the whole picture in mind, I do have my piece of it. So it's helpful to have that there. And just supporting during those moments of tension or challenge, they will come up. So having another person there to talk through that has really been a good thing. So I don't know if that helps kind of.
That's great. I think it's really helpful. And I think, we have evolved into different roles to some degree over time, and we also adapt and pivot as we need to. So sometimes if there is a significant challenge that arises, we pivot and focus more time and attention on that. Or, at this moment, we've been at Dialogue and Design trying to help do some creative brainstorming around creative funding strategies for collaboratives, because a lot of people are trying to figure out what to do. They're really unsure. And so we don't have all the answers, but we can help pull together ideas from different people. And I think it's similar within the consortium as a whole as well. If there's an opportunity or challenge, we can help use that hive mind, if you will, or thinking from different people to create brave space for people to come together and do some brainstorming, with all ideas being welcome to look at ways forward. I think you said that really well, Amber, about the different roles. I think to back up a little bit even, and to think about why collaboratives, why do this work? Amber, you mentioned early on about the value of people working together, because it is too much for any one entity. When we're looking at how to improve water quality in the James River, we're looking at how to improve Chesapeake Bay water quality. I think about wanting to swim in the bay as one of the major reasons, or wanting to swim in the James River, swim in the Rivanna River in our own local watershed. There is a real direct motivation, but I also know, just for me, speaking as a community member there, as well as a facilitator, it's too much to do on my own. And so there's this real beauty in coming together as different groups of people, elders, kids, people who identify in different ways, to be able to work on something together. We say a lot, the collective is more effective, and I truly believe that across the board. And it's taken this shape of kind of this big geographic scale and different folks coming together, but there is kind of a similar vision, similar goal, and love of place. And also it's okay to not be perfect. We try to normalize that the door is open for new people to join, and that there is an element of mentoring that comes into, or making connections to people. So there is a shared goal of partnerships, building water quality through buffers on the ground. You mentioned early on, there's a sister program already built in for implementation. That's smart, because people want to get their hands dirty. Some people want to have absolutely nothing to do with process at all. They want to get, to where they can get the trees in the ground. And other people really love the process and want to talk and make connections. And so we make space for both. But we're in its 7th year now, and a lot of people do point to the consortium as a really amazing model. And collaboratives or networks are going to look different wherever they are. Just for context setting, it's going to be based on what the region is, who the partners are, whether there is a large population density, a small population density, who's doing the work, the level of conflict, rural, urban. But the model of the collaboratives, we've seen time and time again, but again, it needs to be ground truthed in place. And that's that listening phase is so essential, to know that what you're doing is of value, how the collaborative can be helpful to people, not trying to do too much, starting off small, building on successes and learning. And again, finding ways for different people to kind of find their roles and responsibilities. And it takes a lot of conversation. We've had many conversations over, the planning team meets on average twice a month to talk through things. So it is a big, beautiful thing, and collaboration's messy. And it's also really powerful to see what can come through the power of collaboration. I wanted to see, Amber, if you'll talk a little bit about conflict, about, how we've looked at conflict. Just there's not a lot of normalization of conflict within culture. Sometimes people try to sweep it under the rug, which is a very natural response. And I firmly believe that conflict is something that we can grow through, but it can be hard and challenging. And so we also do a little bit of context setting where we say at meetings things like all ideas are welcome. It's okay for people to have areas of disagreement. We have ways for people to have one-on-one conversations. And so they don't need to publicly address something if it's not comfortable. But can you talk a little bit about the role of conflict and how we work with it with the consortium? Mm-hmm. It's a big question.
I know. I'm trying to think of how to say it without saying all the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
All the
Right. All the things. Right. But there will be conflict in collaboratives because it's inevitable. It's just like human life.
There will be, especially if it's a long-lasting one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's gone a long time. Even the best of friendships have conflict if you have them for a long time. That's part of the deal. So what would I say about conflict? I think the relationship building is crucial to the conflict part, because I think if you have opportunities for people to interact in person, getting to know each other over lunch or planting some trees, like you get to know these people as people.
Yes.
And so when a conflict arises, that it's not, you're dealing with the challenge, not the person. It's not like... That helps, for one, I think. Mm-hmm. Without the relationship or knowing each other, or knowing their intent and knowing who they are, it's hard to get through conflict sometimes, I think. But when something comes up, for me, like there's been examples where like, that didn't feel great, what just happened. And then I'm sitting on like, that doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. And then instead of talking to other people about, like, I just went straight to them and shared from a space that was vulnerable for me, but just shared, hey, this thing, I hear this and I understand why you did X, but it kind of left me feeling not so great. Can we think about doing this in a different way or something? And then they were like, I didn't even realize that I didn't even think about that. Oh, you're so right. Let's go back to the drawing board. So just being able to have that conversation and be okay with bringing it up.
Mm-hmm. I think that, you just broke it down, and as you very often do in such a beautifully simple way, it's having a conversation, and through the collaborative work, we create spaces where hopefully people can recognize challenges, work on those challenges together, but also to just say, hey, running into difficulty as human beings is a natural part of the work, especially when you're looking at, particularly in environmental change-making work, there has been a lot of competition over time across the nation, across the globe. That's not, unique to Virginia, between environmental nonprofits, particularly working against each other or competing with funding. And so it takes a little while for that culture shift to happen. And you talked about that in an earlier conversation, for people to recognize, hey, we actually ultimately want the same thing here. How do we work together? There is space for all of us, but scarcity mentality is certainly something that is more commonly promoted in our culture. So recognizing that there's space at the table, if you will, for everybody, that the collaboration table, if you will, to use kind of a cheesy analogy, can grow larger, that we can, you mentioned that earlier, we had 20 people and you're like, that's enough. And we're like, well, who might not be involved, or what geographies don't we know of? But that's knowing that people can still have a space. And then when there's a conflict that comes up, there's a way to be able to turn towards each other, look at what that conflict is. And it doesn't mean the end of the collaborative. It doesn't mean the end of the relationship. It's something to learn from with support. And that's one of the roles that dialogue and design has played and can play, is we can be a, quiet, confidential source of support in moments of conflict and do brainstorming or thinking through options. And sometimes we all need that sounding board. I think you said it very well. I want to move a little bit. So we've talked about the formation of the consortium as a whole, the why. We've talked about roles and responsibilities, the different ways that people meet and when. We've talked about vision and conflict. Starting to move into more of, as a collaborative, again, the consortium starts to mature. I want to look at some of the more practical things that we do in the day-to-day with the consortium, with some of the, what are some of the best practices that you would say we've developed with the consortium? Consensus, facilitation, convening. You've already talked about it to some degree, but what are some of the overall best practices that have helped the consortium be effective over time?
So some nitty gritty stuff. First thing that comes to mind is after our larger gatherings and events, we have the survey that goes out just to capture feedback from the meeting. And we really do read those, and we really do use them to tweak them every year. So I think that would, like any kind of check-in, I think just like default times, figuring out when those default times are that you'd want feedback. It shows up, that same idea shows up in other ways. So we use different contractors for our buffer work or for maintenance. We have a debrief after every planting season with the contractor to share what went well this season, what did not go well, what do we need to shift moving forward. Those have been really helpful. But it gets to be a routine of checking in and then tweaking. So I think that's a best practice, and giving them not just you sharing all the stuff that went wrong, like you open it up, like what did we do? What could we have done better? Vice versa. So letting people know, like our action team meetings or any meeting, this might be obvious, but not always, just what is the meeting, having enough heads up for people of what is the meeting about.
Yes. What are we going to talk about?
Because I don't know how many people have been invited to something like, what is this? And why
are we here?
Why am I here? It's very obvious, but not so obvious, I don't think, if you're not used to doing it. But time is really important to people.
Absolutely.
And we have a ton of opportunities for people to engage. And we don't expect people to be at every single thing, which means you have to let people know with a good heads up, this is the topic we're going to be covering, so they can make up their mind if it's going to be helpful to them or if they're going to feel like they'll be able to contribute.
Absolutely.
There's tons of little best practices all over in all that we do. Those are just some that came to mind.
Absolutely. And valuing people's time. Time is one of our most precious commodities. It's one of the things that we can't get back. And so really I think that's really an important point, Amber, being respectful of people's time, letting them know what they can expect. You mentioned earlier, consistency, even in times of challenge, continuing to show up and be consistent with people and knowing it's a place that they can count on helps build that trust. And those are the two factors, what we've seen time and time again, I'd say within the consortium and across collaboratives, that moves the needle towards being able to realize the vision. It's building relationships and trust. And that takes time. It takes in person, and you can do it online as well, but it takes getting to know people's background and stories and getting to know people as humans and recognizing you're in the same boat as humans. So it's a truly a we experience, and that relationships and trust are really what moves the needle towards creating change and being able to create the future that people want to see. And it's really remarkable.
Big things or a lot of little things. That's what I have to remind myself. I think I have it somewhere in here. Just big things can seem overwhelming, big changes you want to see, but all of the big magical things are made up of lots of little steps. That's all it is.
Absolutely.
Like I can make that phone call. That's one little step towards it. And I think the consistency part is that if you just show up consistently, you can't take it on all at once, but
I love that. Relationship authors John and Julie Gottman talk about, they have a podcast called Small Things Often. And I think about that with collaborative work. It is doing small things often. That really does, it's many small things create the change, kind of one marble at a time to be able to create the change that we want to see more broadly. Some other, I'll mention briefly kind of facilitation and consensus best practices we use, and then we'll move on to some of the growing, the collaborative and engaging folks over time. We use consensus-based decision-making. And with that, everyone has an equal voice on our decision-making capacity. So at the steering committee, someone will make a proposal about something. There was a large site early on in the consortium that the group was considering funding. So Amber brought this idea forward and said, hey, we want to fund this really large restoration site. It's going to be a big chunk of our funding. What do folks think about that? And it wasn't just a one-time vote. So sometimes people talk about consent-based decision-making, and the version of consensus that we use is one of refinement. People had a chance to ask questions about that proposal, and it could be changed and refined with people's input. And that's really important, that real-time decision-making. So a proposal is made. We give people plenty of times to ask questions and to truly understand it so the decision is not rushed. Changes are made to the proposal until people really can have a chance to feel comfortable knowing what it is. And then we use a method of decision making. If we're in person, we use 3, 2, 1 fingers. 3 fingers up means full support for the proposal on the table. 2 fingers means support, but some questions or concerns, but still support. And 1 carefully chosen finger means too many questions or concerns, and the decision would not move forward. And with consensus-based decision making, everyone has the same voice, status, capacity for decision making as everybody else. And we encourage folks, we let them know that a decision is going to be on the table before we make it, so they have a chance to check in with their groups, maybe their family system, maybe their federal agency, maybe their nonprofit organization, about what the decision is. And if they're not ready to make the decision and they need some more time to consider it, or they need some time to check in, then we'll make that modification as we can. So we've seen time and time again that consensus-based decision-making is way more robust and lasting because we ask people to really support it with their whole selves, not just part of them, not just the part of it they like best. But if something's not going to work for them, they really can say, hey, no, this doesn't work for me. And what we found, when someone does bring up a 1 finger questions or concerns, they often have questions or concerns that other people have too. We make a modification to the proposal and it's often stronger than the original proposal was because folks are in it together. Rarely do we see a consensus decision not move forward. And I'll knock on wood because I really actually haven't seen a consensus decision not move forward in different collaboratives that I work with because people are in it together for the long haul often. So it's a really phenomenal way to make decisions. It can be more work, but it often is just such a stronger process. And that same project that did get approved early on in the consortium has been a really strong learning lab for building partnerships, for being able to test things out, to be able to expand to other areas. And so it's been a really neat way to see how that consensus-based decision has grown over time. Amber, anything else you want to say about consensus or facilitation or best practices?
I think just connect it with the consensus around budget stuff of just having that transparent budget. I take it for granted now because we've been doing it so long, but I don't think that's always very typical of organizations, especially say one organization gets a grant, oftentimes it's kind of behind the scenes on what all of that looks like. And we try not have it be behind the scenes. It's very open in terms of what funding is being spent on. So that's been important.
Absolutely. And that's at our decision-making level. The steering committee, James River Association, Amber pulls together usually once a quarter an updated budget. What's been spent? What are the funding sources? So people can see right there. They can click on it and be like, oh, I can see what funds are coming in, going out, who's getting what, being sensitive to people's, information where needed. But it really does build a sense of trust. And it's not a common thing in collaboratives. It does take time to pull those budgets together. Fiscal agents do huge amounts of work behind the scenes that others often don't see. Those grant reports, the, building relationships with funders. And of course, there are other ways to fund collaboratives as well, but that budget work is really important. Some of the other facilitation best practices that we do are to make sure at the beginning of every meeting, we have a couple minutes of background and overview about the consortium. And that's so everybody, if it's their first meeting, they can still feel like they can belong. They still know, okay, I know enough background information that I can show up and be present and feel like a valued member and not feel like I am lost. And that's a really important thing. That 2 to 5 minutes, Amber often gives kind of an overview of the consortium. Here's who we are. Here's how we formed. Helps people feel a sense of belonging. And I cannot underscore the importance of it. We also ask people to introduce themselves. It does take time to introduce themselves, but we often say, please share your name and affiliation. We say that community member is a welcome affiliation because if someone doesn't have an agency hat or a nonprofit organization hat or a faith-based organization hat, that's totally fine. We still welcome them. They're part of the meeting or gathering. We're glad they're there. And we often ask some kind of question. That might be in a small group if we do have a large group, but it's a chance for people to get their voices out and on the table early on and to be part of the engagement. And people need a place to just be heard often. Every once in a while, someone will go off on a tangent, ranting about something early in the meeting. We hear them, we let them know that we hear them, and then we redirect it back to what's the focus is. So we develop agendas in advance and we share them. We put meeting guidelines out at the beginning of meetings. Often those include all ideas are welcome. Acronym alert. Amber probably can say them all by heart at this phase. We ask people to spell out acronyms the first time they use them so no one feels lost in alphabet soup, which it's very easy to use a bunch of acronyms. And then cell phones on silent. Last, we always ask if photos are okay. We've had people in victim witness protection programs. We had someone in a meeting last week. There was a child in foster care and couldn't be in photographs. And so we acknowledge the awkwardness of asking that, but we make sure to always ask if photographs are okay. And then we invite other meeting guidelines from participants to see if there's anything else that is important to people they might not say. Someone might say, hey, I really don't want to be interrupted, or I really do want to talk about this new federal funding opportunity, or whatever the thing is. It could be an agenda topic or a guideline. We keep the conversation moving forward. We keep shared sense of timekeeping, but we also let the meeting flex. If there's some hot button topic that we need to talk about, we'll take more time to talk about that, but we end meetings on time. That's really important to value people's time, and we might have to cover something down the road. But for the most part, we do cover what we have intended to at the beginning of the meeting because we often begin with the end in mind. We're clear on what our hope is for a meeting or gathering, what's a desired outcome for that event, and we design that engagement around it to make sure we try to get there. And if we can't get there, if more conversations needed, then we'll build that in and we follow up. We always create meeting summaries, particularly tracking action items, and then we follow up with those action items to see if they've been done in a kind way with people, because people are busy, but we do follow up with those action items. And there are a whole bunch of other meeting best practices that folks can just reach out to me if they have questions about them, or if they're taking the course, they'll be able to learn more about that. So I want to move to the growing the collaborative phase. In its 7th year, that's a long-term collaborative now. Can you talk a little bit, Amber, about what it has been like to grow the consortium over time? You talked about that 20 people to kind of 600 people, and that's participating in some different way. But how do you keep people engaged? How do you keep the momentum up? And then how do we share about the work with other people with the action plan and guiding doc?
One thing I'd say about the growth is growing workforce is also at the heart of part of what the consortium is about, getting more people into this work. And what collaboratives, not just our consortium, but what collaboratives do a great job at is it helps. So the partner have staff turnover, hopefully not all the time, but it's a frequent thing if you're working with this many different organizations. So there's new staff and new people coming on board all the time. And oftentimes that could be at an organization where there's like one other person that's doing something totally different, aren't into buffers at all. So they could be all alone. If this type of network didn't exist, it would take them a while to get up to speed. But by having access to something like this, they're looped in and they automatically have all of these people and resources at their fingertips, which is
100%.
We've seen that. I'm thinking of some of our partners who brought on people within each year. We do a Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional Buffer Certification training series every fall. So if a new staff person starts that year, they immediately can get a 3-part training. Which is awesome. So that I think is one way that we are helping grow not just the partnerships, but growing the capacity of our organizations to participate and be bringing buffers into their work.
Yes.
So that's huge. Ways that we engage them on growing. So we mentioned we do different events throughout the year. We try to move those around, especially to areas maybe where we're like, we haven't seen that many people from that region come to things, or I wonder what they're up to. I haven't heard how they're doing or what's going on there. So we'll try to plan our meetings in those different regions so that we're not always at the same one every time. And that we get a chance to hear from new voices and new places. What else? Growth is not always easy too. I feel like there's this tension of we've created a lot of amazing, successful programs that we want to keep going. So the people who were running those, their hands are full now. They've got a thing that they're running. Meanwhile, there's new ideas always coming up, and there's
right
tension of wanting to well, we got to move it forward. Well, yeah, we need to move it forward, but who has a hand? Nobody. We're all full. And so there's a tension there of wanting to keep people excited about new things being formed, but also being respectful of our partners' capacity and of our own capacity. We can only push forward so many things at one time. And so the new idea thing could take some time of figuring out maybe what partner is out there that we haven't met that maybe does have capacity for that. So that's a thing. Trying to think of what are the other questions.
So how do we share about the work of the consortium with others? Why have we developed an action plan? Why have we developed a guiding document? What's their purpose and what are they?
Mm-hmm. So early on, I think our action plan and guiding doc at some point were all in one. We were trying to figure out what they became two. The guiding document is like how we function kind of thing. So that if I'm not planning on going anywhere, but if people leave, there's a document that this is how it works. We have a steering committee, we have a planning team, we send these things out, we have a newsletter, kind of like, it's like your operating document, a cheat sheet of how things go. And then the action plan is more like we usually do them around a 3-year time period. Like what are the things happening within each action team? What projects or what things are we trying to move forward? What are the things we're working on collectively? And some of it we may have funding for. Other things we may just do in gray, like this has come up as a thing, but we need funding or we need more capacity around it to really move it forward. So I think the action plan gives people just a shared document to see what we're all about, what we're working on. They can easily see where they may fit in, where their work may overlap, or areas where they may be like, I see this thing in gray. I'd love to move that thing forward. Maybe they have resources or something to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's amazing too is that these documents are all on the website. So jamesriverconsortium.org, the guiding doc, which again is a little bit more internal facing. It's really kind of for the planning team and for the steering committee. But if people want to know, what are your fonts? What are your colors that you use in the branding? How do you make consensus? Well, we have it articulated there. Yep. What's the meeting frequency? The action plan is designed to be partner focused, external focused, but there are additional planning worksheets in the background that do have more details, but it also lets people know, as you just said, Amber, hey, I really want to get involved in planting trees. Where is that happening next year? How can I plug in? Sometimes we'll just have that one-on-one conversation you mentioned earlier with new folks to help them get plugged in. But if they want to work on something, we help find a way to do it. And so it's a way to keep us on track on what we're up to help the implementation, those folks who want to get their hands dirty, which we all want to do, help them know what we're doing, and then to have a way to track our progress and momentum over time. So they're really important documents, and Amber and Rachel and others have done a tremendous job working with the action teams to update the document, every 3 years, but also annually. And that comes into learning and evaluation. We talked earlier about doing interviews and key issues reports, but we do an annual evaluation for the consortium as well. And every 3 years or so, we do a more in-depth evaluation. That's been important. We ask different questions at different levels. We'll have a survey, one-on-one conversations, different ways to engage partners across the consortium as a whole who might just come to one meeting. We'll have more in-depth focus groups or steering committee meetings focused on a more in-depth evaluation. How are we doing? Are we on track towards our vision and mission? We have values as a consortium as well. Are we using those values? Are we on track towards meeting our goals? And it's not just number of trees. We're cognizant of the vision of building partnerships. Are we doing things that are helping to build partnerships? Where are we being successful? Where are we missing the mark? Because we're going to miss the mark because we're humans. And so we look at those challenges and then we find ways to make adjustments. So we're doing evaluation every year in some different way, and we're building in a culture of learning, being a learning network, both internally within the consortium as a whole, as well as externally, and sharing that information out. It's been really helpful to keep things relevant and fresh and to know that we're not biting off too much, or to know when to bite off more, or to know when to refocus on the vision and mission, as people know that their feedback is really important in that evaluation process. So keeping the door open to new members, new participants is something that we always do. Celebrating people when they move on, because people do need to move on. People retire, people have babies, people move to other parts of the world. So as we move into this last part, we've talked about ways that we keep people engaged, and we have had a really tremendous funding partner over the years with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And there's also been an intentional effort to look at developing innovative and creative funding sources. Can you talk a little bit about long-term funding considerations? And then we'll wrap up with some of the different resilient collaborative model elements. So I'll turn it over to you, Amber, for that kind of funding piece, which is especially poignant and challenging right now.
Yeah. Yep. So I think it was 2 years ago, we looked at like, what would it be to be a resilient collaborative, and we went through and had discussions. It was a year long. We had really in-depth discussions around like action, what is the work we're doing, collaboration or coordination, and how we're these roles like that JRA plays in dialogue design, and funding. And so we came up with our plan for what that would look like. And so fortunately, like, we've been thinking about these questions. So and some of that funding thing, some of it is seeking more funding. Some of it is like looking internally, like, what are our priorities? And so that's a big step for us right now, is what is it that we need just to keep us alive in case of some funding challenge where it is all put on pause or we don't have it. What do we do? How do we make sure that it doesn't go away? And then also knowing, and this is all done with our steering committee and our partners. This isn't me just behind the scenes saying what's important.
Right.
I'm just one of the pieces of it. So there's sort of the like emergency level, like what is the basic, what is the core needs of our group? And then what is our ideal scenario? Like to operate at a normal, not growing and doing a bunch of new stuff, but just, even keel kind of
ongoing. Yeah.
And across our action plan, like what are those things that, we know works, and this is what we want. And then that third level of, if you want us to do more and take on more new awesome stuff, it's going to be more like this. And so part of that exercise for long-term funding is figuring out and coming to an agreement with the group on what those levels are, so that when you're faced with, shoot, we didn't get that grant.
Yep.
Or the opposite, oh, awesome, we just got all this funding. Like, you have a plan that you've already done the hard work to figure out what those priorities are. I think is really important. So you're ready for it.
Yeah.
And it's what funders want to know. So as we're preparing to think about how we diversify our funding, we got to have those conversations with folks. And that is the kind of information they want to know. How much do you need? How much have you done so far? What things have you already accomplished? And what are you hoping to do in the next couple of years? So we're working on that. I think a priority for me and the group right now is especially finding more stable funding for those core needs to keep. Because at the end of the day, as long as we're still gathering and having spaces to talk to one another, that's like the bare minimum, the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And so how can we make sure we have something figured out from that's not up and down? And we started a funding committee last year, I believe. And so the steering committee is there to make decisions, again, and guide what our priorities are, but not all of them want to sit there in the funding depths. So we do have a funding committee that's formed, and that's evolving too. We're figuring out what is the role of that funding committee and what does this look like? But I'm excited about it. I think if we apply the same values and things that we've done through the consortium to the way that we look at funding, that's exciting to me. Like to look at it more collaboratively.
Yeah.
Is a good thing.
And it takes that collective mind, if you will, of, okay, this is a hard situation. How are we going to work together to brainstorm and solve around it? And to think of different creative ways for funding. I think it's amazing when you have one funder to fund work for the long haul, and it's uncommon. It's also uncommon to have a funder who understands or sees the value of the collective work and collaborative work. Some other funding strategies. There's a podcast episode on what Amber mentioned about resilient networks. I think it's episode 48. We looked a couple years ago at, well, what does it take to become a resilient collaborative? We had a couple different Dialogue and Design. We had a few different collaboratives that were looking at that question. The consortium was really leading that. We had built in to that initial grant, what would it take to build a resilient collaborative model? And so we did look at collaboration, action, and funding. We did a bunch of research into best practices from other collaboratives as part of that ongoing learning, and looked at 4 different models that collaboratives can use. And that's outlined in the podcast episode, and really looked at what's appropriate for the consortium now, and then recognizing that it may shift. Sometimes you have to move to a different model, like a self-rotating leadership model, if something comes up. Networks come at these crossroad moments. And so being able to be prepared, I think that's a really important point, Amber. You know, you're talking about we had laid the foundation for looking at change, because change will invariably come up, and change is coming up and will come up. And so being prepared to know how to pivot and shift without everything falling apart. And that's where collaboratives really, sometimes things get way too complicated, and being able to just simplify, getting together, talking about what the work is and how you want to accomplish it, and keeping the heart of the work of that relationships, trust, partnerships, implementation at the core of the work. That's really important, so that you don't get too spun out into too many different areas. So being able to pivot to simplicity, I think, is a really important thing, and something we're encouraging people to do right now. Simplify, 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 so that not only do people not get overwhelmed, which a lot of people, as if they're looking at a situation with funding challenges, can be quite overwhelmed. So how to keep things simple, but also how to just keep the ongoing work moving forward until there is another shift and maybe more expansion. So as we get ready to wrap up, I'll say that, the consortium is a really amazing example of collective work being effective. We've seen an increase in water quality. We've seen new partnerships form. We've seen a lot of excitement, growth. We've gone through hardship. We'll go through hardship. There is joy and collective joy. I love that phrase I learned about through Brene Brown of collective effervescence. We've experienced that when people get together and learn from one another. That's often the buffer summits have that sense of joy and excitement and being able to celebrate the work that's happening. And it really often is through the power of collaboratives that we see that. And we're also, at the beginning of the consortium, we looked at other entities. What were other folks doing, like in the Susquehanna or in the Delaware River? What does make sense here? And we're continuing to learn from other people. So building in that learning has been really important. And then having a really dedicated partner like you are, Amber, as a convener who's thoughtful and intentional and dedicated to the work, but also thinking long term. So what lessons learned or takeaways would you like to offer folks as we get ready to wrap up?
It sounds so cheesy, but it really is about the relationships. That is it. If you're feeling like overwhelmed or strapped for time, I don't think I've ever regretted making the decision to go be at an event with partners. I've never regretted that. When I'm at my desk thinking I've got to do all this stuff, because I do. Not that I can just be out playing all the time, but it often, what seems like it's going to set me back or something, I usually get out of that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just have the answers to all these things now. And now whatever might have been stuck is now 10 steps ahead if I instead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just seeing people in person.
100%.
Yeah, moves things way more quickly.
Absolutely. And there's also, I wanted to bring in that there is a sense of gratitude too. I'm thinking about within our own Dialogue and Design team, we have Philippa Belches, who's a right-hand person. It is absolutely a team effort, and there's no way that any one of us could do it. So it's the learning together. It's the partnership with Amber and other James River Association members, and then to funders, steering committee members, action team members, broader participants. So there's just really so much gratitude to offer to people doing work across the ground in the middle and upper James, folks we know about and folks we don't know about yet. So just a huge shout out of thanks to people who are doing the work on the ground and building those relationships, because that's really where the magic happens. So Amber, it's been such a treat to be able to talk with you about the consortium today. Any other ways that you want to share with folks that they can learn about the consortium as we close? Again, you want to recap the website again for folks?
they can visit jamesriverconsortium.org. If you want to see us in person in action, look at our calendar. We have an in-person event coming up in May in Petersburg and in Bath County in September. And the Buffer Summit is in October in Richmond. And another big shout out for collaboration. National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has been funding this effort since its start in 2019. And I think sometimes change comes from like bottom up, but I think National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has been committed to supporting collaboratives. They believe in it. They've seen the power of them, which is why their one whole program of theirs is really focused on supporting that, which is huge. And I think has inspired a lot of groups to get into this messy collaboration stuff, even if they didn't know what they were getting into.
Right. And they're there, and then they're seeing change, and they're seeing the messiness and the joy and all of it. And huge shout out to NISWF. Amber, thanks for your good work and for joining today. Really appreciate your time. So thank you.
Thanks, Christine.